5 children dead before their 10th birthday. A brewing empire worth over $400 million in today's money. And a mansion so technologically advanced it had Milwaukee's first private elevator in 1892 when most Americans were still using outhouses. This is the story of Captain Frederick Pabst and the cursed mansion that held both his greatest triumph and his deepest tragedy. And here's what no one's talking about. While the Vanderbilts and Rockefellers built monuments to themselves that still stand proud today, the Pabst family lost everything within a generation. The mansion that cost $254,000 to build in 1892, that's $8.7 million today, nearly became a parking lot. Gone, almost demolished, erased from history. But that's not even the darkest part. The real story isn't about the beer fortune or the magnificent Flemish Renaissance architecture. It's about what happens when immigrant ambition meets Gilded Age excess, when every technological innovation in your home can't save your children from disease, and when your family's legacy crumbles the moment you're buried. I'm going to show you the financial records, the death certificates, and the architectural plans that reveal why this mansion represents everything wrong with Gilded Age wealth. And I'm going to prove to you that the Pabst family made the exact same mistakes that destroy lottery winners, athletes, and entrepreneurs today. If you're ready to see what really happened behind those carved stone walls, let's begin. Frederick Pabst wasn't born into wealth. He arrived in America in 1848 as a 13-year-old German immigrant with nothing, zero. His father worked as a tavern keeper, and Frederick started working on steamships when he was barely old enough to tie a rope. By age 21, he was a Great Lakes shipping captain commanding vessels through storms that killed dozens of sailors every season. The pay was good, about $1,500 per year, equivalent to $52,000 today. But it wasn't fortune money. It was survival money. Here's where the story takes its first turn. In 1862, Frederick married Maria Best, the daughter of Philip Best, who owned a small Milwaukee brewery called Best & Company. The brewery was producing maybe 300 barrels of beer per year and barely breaking even. Most German immigrant breweries in Milwaukee were struggling operations, family businesses that kept the lights on but didn't make anyone rich. Frederick kept working as a ship captain. He wasn't planning on making beer his life. But then in 1864, his ship, the SS Comanche, was caught in a massive storm on Lake Michigan. The vessel was destroyed. Frederick barely survived. That near-death experience changed everything. He walked away from shipping forever and joined his father-in-law's brewery full-time in 1864. And this is where Frederick Pabst showed he wasn't just another beer maker. He was a visionary capitalist who understood scale, branding, and vertical integration before those terms even existed. Within 2 years, he became a partner. By 1873, he and his brother-in-law Emil Schandine had bought out Philip Best and renamed it the Philip Best Brewing Company. Production exploded. In 1874, they produced 100,000 barrels. By 1880, production hit 200,000 barrels annually. But here's the number that matters. By 1890, Pabst was producing over 500,000 barrels per year, making it one of the largest breweries in America. Revenue reached approximately $2.5 million annually. That's over $82 million in today's money every single year. Frederick Pabst's personal fortune was estimated at $12 to $15 million by 1892, equivalent to roughly $400 to $500 million today. He owned real estate across Milwaukee, controlled shipping routes, invested in Chicago properties, and held equity in multiple related businesses. This wasn't just success. This was empire building. And then he decided to build the mansion. In 1890, Frederick Pabst purchased an entire city block at the corner of Grand Avenue and 20th Street in Milwaukee. The price, $45,000, equivalent to about $1.5 million today. He hired George Bowman Ferry and Alfred Charles Class, two of Milwaukee's most prominent architects, to design a showpiece residence that would cement his status among America's industrial elite. The budget was unlimited. The timeline was aggressive. Construction began in 1890 and finished in 1892. Total cost, $254,000, equivalent to approximately $8.7 million today. Let me show you what that money bought. The mansion sprawled across 20,000 square feet with 37 rooms across 3 floors. The exterior featured Flemish Renaissance Revival architecture with carved stone, ornate metalwork, and a commanding front entrance that made every visitor feel small. But the real innovation was inside. This house was equipped with technology that most Americans wouldn't see for another 20 years. Electric lighting powered by the mansion's own generator in the basement. An internal telephone system connecting every floor. This was 1892, remember, when Alexander Graham Bell's invention was barely 16 years old and most homes didn't even have gas lighting yet. Wait, there's more. The mansion featured servant call buttons in every major room connected to an elaborate buzzer system in the service quarters. Hot water radiators for central heating, eliminating the need for fireplaces in every room. A built-in safe in the library. Ornate carved oak woodwork throughout, with different wood species in nearly every room. Bavarian oak, African mahogany, Mexican rosewood. The grand staircase featured hand-carved newel posts and balusters that took craftsmen months to complete. The stained glass windows were custom designed and imported, featuring intricate geometric patterns and family motifs. And then there was the elevator. Milwaukee's first private residential elevator, installed in 1892. Hydraulic-powered, capable of carrying multiple passengers from the basement to the 3rd floor. The cost of the elevator alone was estimated at $15,000. That's over $500,000 in today's money for a single mechanical feature. Vanderbilt had elevators in his New York mansion. Rockefeller had them. Carnegie had them. And now, Frederick Pabst, the German immigrant ship captain turned beer baron, had one too. He had arrived. He belonged in the same conversation as America's wealthiest families. Or so he thought. Here's the part that every historical tour of the Pabst mansion glosses over. Frederick and Maria Pabst had 10 children between 1863 and 1875. 10. In 12 years, Maria was almost constantly pregnant, which was typical for wealthy Gilded Age families who could afford doctors and household help. Large families signaled prosperity, virility, and dynastic planning. The Vanderbilts had 13 children. The Rockefellers had 5, but aimed for more. Children were legacy insurance in an era before modern estate planning. But only 5 Pabst children survived to adulthood. 5 out of 10. A 50% child mortality rate. Let that sink in for a moment. Frederick Pabst had an elevator in his home, electric lighting in every room, the finest doctors Milwaukee could provide, and access to any medical treatment money could buy in the 1870s and 1880s. And he still lost half his children. The causes varied. Diphtheria, scarlet fever, pneumonia, complications from childhood diseases that are preventable today with basic vaccines. Wealth couldn't save them. Technology couldn't save them. The most advanced mansion in Milwaukee couldn't save them. The children who died, Frederick Jr., Emma, Clara, Herman, and one other whose records remain incomplete. The children who survived, Gustave, Emma Louise, Fred Jr., a second child with that name, Ida, and August. Each death devastated the family. Maria Pabst suffered repeated bouts of what Victorian doctors called nervous exhaustion, likely clinical depression combined with grief. Frederick threw himself deeper into business, expanding the brewery, acquiring more real estate, building more, always building more. The mansion became his monument not just to success, but to what success couldn't protect. And here's what no one talks about. That mansion wasn't a home. It was a mausoleum for lost children, dressed up in carved oak and stained glass. Every room Frederick and Maria walked through reminded them of the children who should have been there, but weren't. The nursery on the 3rd floor, designed for 10 children but occupied by 5. The family dining room with empty chairs, the photographs in silver frames showing children who never reached their teens. Victorian grief culture demanded public stoicism and private mourning. You displayed wealth publicly. You buried sorrow privately. The Pabst mansion was the perfect embodiment of that contradiction, spectacular on the outside, haunted on the inside. But that wasn't the real problem. The real problem was that Frederick Pabst built his entire identity around a business and a building that his surviving children neither wanted nor valued. He assumed legacy. He assumed continuation. He assumed that because he built an empire, his children would maintain it. This is the fatal assumption that destroys family wealth across every generation, in every era, and the Pabst family would prove it catastrophically. January 1st, 1904. New Year's Day. Frederick Pabst died at age 68 in his magnificent mansion, surrounded by family, servants, and the technological marvels he'd installed 12 years earlier. The cause of death: complications from cardiovascular disease and what doctors described as general systemic failure. He'd been declining for months, his health deteriorating despite access to the best medical care available. His funeral was massive. Milwaukee's business elite attended. The brewery closed for a day of mourning. Newspapers declared it the end of an era. His estate was valued at approximately $18 million. That's over $600 million in today's money. The brewery remained profitable, producing over 1 million barrels annually. Real estate holdings across Milwaukee and Chicago generated substantial rental income. Stock portfolios, bonds, and investment trusts were structured to provide for his widow and children for generations. On paper, the Pabst family was set for perpetual wealth. Frederick had done everything right. He had diversified. He'd built systems. He'd created multiple income streams beyond just the brewery. He had even structured trusts to protect his grandchildren. And it all fell apart within 30 years. Here's how it happened. Frederick's son, Gustav Pabst, took over leadership of the brewery. Gustav was competent, but lacked his father's vision and aggression. Under Gustav's leadership from 1904 to 1943, the Pabst Brewing Company remained profitable, but stopped innovating. Market share eroded as newer, more aggressive competitors like Anheuser-Busch and Miller expanded nationally. Gustav focused on maintaining rather than growing. Maintenance thinking destroys wealth, always. Growth compounds, maintenance erodes, but the real killer was Prohibition. The 18th Amendment passed in 1919, banning alcohol production and sales nationwide. Every brewery in America faced existential crisis. Some pivoted to near beer and malt products. Some diversified into cheese, dairy, or other foods. Some simply shut down. The Pabst Brewing Company survived by producing Pablo, a near-beer product with less than 0.5% alcohol, and by selling malt syrup that customers definitely weren't using to brew illegal beer at home. Revenue collapsed from over $20 million annually before Prohibition to roughly $3 million during the dry years, an 85% revenue drop overnight. The mansion became too expensive to maintain. Property taxes in Milwaukee had increased substantially since 1892. The cost of employing a full household staff, butler, cook, maids, groundskeeper, chauffeur, was eating through capital. Heating, electricity, maintenance, and repairs on a 20,000 square foot mansion required constant cash flow. Maria Pabst died in 1906, just 2 years after Frederick. The children inherited the house, but none of them wanted to live there. Too large, too formal, too much upkeep. Too many memories of dead siblings and Victorian-era childhood trauma. In 1908, the family sold the mansion. The buyer, the Roman Catholic Archdiocese of Milwaukee. Purchase price, $100,000, 60% less than the original construction cost just 16 years earlier. The Archdiocese converted the mansion into the residence for the Archbishop of Milwaukee. It served in that capacity from 1908 until 1975, 67 years as a religious institution rather than a family home. The Pabst children took their inheritance money and scattered. No consolidation, no long-term family strategy, no effort to maintain the brewery as a multi-generational dynasty. And nobody's talking about why. Here's the section every documentary and historical society skips. They show you the carved oak, they show you the stained glass, they show you the elevator and the servant buzzers and the electric lights. But they never explain why the Pabst family lost a $600 million fortune within a single generation, or why a mansion that cost $8.7 million to build sold for a fraction of its value just 16 years later. Let me give you the real reasons. Reason 1. Survivor trauma destroyed family cohesion. The 5 surviving Pabst children grew up watching half their siblings die. They watched their mother sink into depression. They watched their father cope by obsessively building business and real estate empires. Childhood trauma creates avoidance patterns. The surviving children didn't want to maintain the mansion because living there meant confronting memories of dead brothers and sisters. They didn't want to run the brewery together because it represented their father's escape mechanism, not their own ambitions. Trauma fractures family unity. Fractured families don't maintain dynastic wealth. Reason 2. Frederick never trained his children in wealth management. He was too busy building. Gustav learned brewery operations, but not investment strategy, not diversification, not how to think 10 steps ahead like his father did. The other children learned even less. Emma Louise married into another wealthy family but had no independent financial education. Fred Jr. focused on real estate but not at his father's scale. Ida and August pursued genteel upper-class lives without business involvement. When Frederick died, his children inherited money but not the mindset that created it. This pattern repeats constantly. Lottery winners, athletes inherited wealth. The money disappears within a generation because the skills to create it weren't transferred. Reason 3. The mansion represented the wrong kind of wealth. Frederick built it to signal status, to prove he belonged among Vanderbilts and Rockefellers. But status symbols don't generate cash flow. The mansion cost a fortune to maintain but produced zero revenue. Property taxes, insurance, staff salaries, heating, electricity, maintenance, all outflow, no inflow. Meanwhile, the wealthiest families of the Gilded Age were buying farmland, investing in railroads, acquiring oil wells and mines, income-producing assets. The Vanderbilts lost their fortune too, by the way, for the exact same reason. Too many mansions, too much display, not enough cash-flowing investments. Display destroys wealth, always. Reason 4. Prohibition destroyed brewery value permanently. Even after Prohibition ended in 1933, the brewing industry never returned to pre-1919 profitability levels. Competition increased, consolidation began. Regional breweries got squeezed by national brands with superior distribution and marketing. The Pabst Brewing Company survived, but as a shadow of its former dominance. By the 1950s, it was the 5th largest brewery in America, still significant, but not dominant. By the 1980s, it had fallen further. In 1985, the Pabst family sold their remaining stake completely. The brewery changed hands multiple times and today operates as a brand owned by a private holding company. Total family ownership duration, 81 years from 1873 to 1954 when the family sold majority control. Reason 5. Milwaukee's decline erased real estate value. Frederick invested heavily in Milwaukee real estate, assuming the city would continue growing as an industrial center. It didn't. By the 1960s and 1970s, Milwaukee faced urban decline, white flight, and industrial job losses typical of Rust Belt cities. The neighborhood around the Pabst mansion deteriorated. Property values collapsed. What was once an elite district became a struggling area with vacant lots and declining commercial activity. The mansion itself became surrounded by parking lots and low-income housing. Real estate fortunes depend on location appreciation. When cities decline, real estate fortunes evaporate. Reason 6. No one in the family fought to keep it. When the archdiocese decided to sell the mansion in 1975, no Pabst descendant stepped forward to buy it back or preserve it. The family had scattered geographically and emotionally. Great-grandchildren of Frederick barely knew the mansion existed. This is what happens when family legacy becomes a burden rather than a bond. The mansion was saved by Wisconsin Heritage's Inc., a preservation nonprofit, not by the family. Preservationists bought it for $50,000, 80% less than the already discounted 1908 sale price, and spent years restoring it. The Pabst family contributed nothing. Reason 7. The curse wasn't supernatural. It was structural. People love to talk about cursed mansions and haunted rooms. The Pabst mansion has ghost tour operators who claim to sense spirits of dead children. That's entertaining nonsense. The real curse was mathematical. High fixed costs plus declining revenue equals wealth destruction. Add in generational trauma, lack of financial education, poor investment choices, catastrophic regulatory change, urban decay, and family disintegration, and you get inevitable collapse. No ghosts required, just predictable economic forces that destroy unprepared families in every generation. And nobody's talking about this because it destroys the fantasy that wealth, once earned, stays forever. By 1975, the Archdiocese of Milwaukee no longer needed a mansion as a residence for its archbishop. The Catholic Church was consolidating properties, reducing expenses, and modernizing operations. The mansion was expensive to heat, required constant maintenance, and sat in a declining neighborhood. The Archdiocese put it up for sale. The asking price, $100,000, the same price they'd paid in 1908. Adjusted for inflation, that was a catastrophic loss. But there were no buyers. Nobody wanted a 20,000-square-foot Victorian mansion in a declining urban neighborhood requiring hundreds of thousands in deferred maintenance. The most likely buyer, a commercial developer who planned to demolish it and build a parking lot. This almost happened. The developer had financing arranged. Demolition contracts were being negotiated. The mansion that had cost $254,000 to build and represented Frederick Pabst's greatest triumph was within months of becoming a flat asphalt surface for downtown workers to park their cars. Erased, gone, converted into a revenue-generating parking lot, which ironically would have been a smarter investment than keeping the mansion had been for the Pabst family. Then, preservationists intervened. Wisconsin Heritages, heirs, a small nonprofit dedicated to architectural preservation, launched an emergency fundraising campaign. They argued that the Pabst mansion represented irreplaceable Gilded Age architecture, that losing it would erase a crucial piece of Milwaukee's history, and that restoration could turn it into a tourist attraction and educational resource. They scraped together $50,000 and bought the mansion in 1978. It was a desperate gamble. The building was deteriorating. The neighborhood was declining. Tourist interest seemed unlikely. But here's what happened next. Preservationists spent decades restoring the mansion, tracking down original furniture pieces, recreating period-accurate color schemes, repairing the elevator, and rebuilding systems that had been neglected for years. They launched tours. They partnered with Milwaukee's tourism board. They created educational programs for schools. They hosted events and weddings. And, slowly, the mansion became Milwaukee's premier historic house museum. Annual visitors today exceed 20,000. The mansion generates enough revenue to sustain itself through admissions, events, and donations. The Pabst family? Still not involved. Descendants occasionally visit as tourists. Some have donated photographs or family artifacts. But there's no family foundation supporting the mansion, no Pabst family trust funding operations, no dynastic commitment to preserving their ancestors' legacy. The mansion survives despite the family, not because of them. This is the ultimate irony. Frederick Pabst built a monument to cement his legacy, and it only survived because strangers who shared no blood relation cared enough to save it. Wait, there's more. The mansion sits in the same location it always has, at the corner of Grand Avenue and 20th Street. But the neighborhood around it has changed completely. The grand homes of Frederick's wealthy neighbors are gone, demolished decades ago. Empty lots, commercial buildings, light industrial spaces. The Pabst mansion stands isolated, a Victorian time capsule surrounded by 21st century urban decay. Walking up to the mansion today feels surreal. This elaborate carved stone palace rising out of a struggling neighborhood like a mirage. The juxtaposition is jarring and sad. And here's the kicker. The parking lot that almost replaced the mansion? It finally got built. Just 2 blocks away, where one of Frederick's fellow beer barons built his own mansion in the 1880s. That mansion was demolished in 1983. Today it's a parking lot generating about $100,000 annually for its owner. The parking lot makes more money than the Mansion Museum ever will. That's the brutal truth about wealth in America. Productive assets beat beautiful assets every single time. The modern tours of the Pabst Mansion focus on architectural details, technological innovations, and Gilded Age opulence. Tour guides explain the carved oak woodwork, the symbolism in the stained glass, the engineering behind the hydraulic elevator. They show visitors the music room, the library, the grand dining room, the private family quarters. They describe Captain Pabst as an immigrant success story, a self-made millionaire, a pillar of Milwaukee society. The tours are entertaining and educational, but they skip the death toll. Tour guides mention some children who passed away young in a single sentence, then move on quickly to discuss the butler's pantry or the servants' quarters. They don't explain that half the children born in this house died here. They don't describe Maria Pabst's grief-stricken decline. They don't mention that Frederick coped by obsessively expanding his business empire. They don't explain that the mansion's opulence was partially a reaction to trauma, building grander, adding more technology, proving success to compensate for private tragedy. The tours also skip the financial collapse. No mention that the family sold the mansion just 16 years after building it at a 60% loss. No explanation of how a $600 million fortune evaporated within 30 years of Frederick's death. No discussion of Prohibition's catastrophic impact on the brewery. No acknowledgement that the family lost control of the company completely by 1954. The tours present the Pabst story as unambiguous triumph. Immigrant arrives, builds empire, constructs magnificent mansion, achieves American dream. The end. That's not the end. That's not even the middle. The real end is that the American dream the Pabsts achieved was unsustainable. Built on a business model that Prohibition destroyed, invested in assets that generated maintenance costs instead of cash flow, and passed to children traumatized and unprepared to maintain it. The mansion became a burden. The brewery became a slowly declining asset. The family scattered. The fortune dissolved. This pattern repeats constantly across American history, but we prefer the simplified narrative. Hard work leads to success. Success leads to mansions. Mansions last forever. Here's what actually lasts: cash-flowing businesses, diversified investment portfolios, financial education passed across generations, and families unified by shared purpose rather than fractured by trauma. The Pabst Mansion had none of those. It had carved oak and stained glass and a hydraulic elevator. Beautiful, impressive, expensive, and ultimately irrelevant to sustained wealth. The Rockefellers, who built similar mansions at the same time, maintained their wealth because they treated mansions as consumption and invested seriously in oil, railroads, banking, and later in diversified trusts managed by professionals across generations. The Vanderbilts, who built even grander mansions, lost their fortune for the same reason the Pabsts did. Too much display, not enough productive investment, and nobody's talking about this because the truth is uncomfortable. We want to believe that if we work hard enough, we can build something that lasts forever. We want to believe that success, once achieved, becomes permanent. We want to believe that beautiful buildings and strong brands protect us from economic forces and family dysfunction. But the Pabst Mansion proves otherwise. It proves that wealth without wisdom disappears. It proves that trauma destroys legacy as surely as bad investments do. It proves that mansions are monuments to ego, not vehicles for lasting prosperity. Ghost tour operators love the Pabst Mansion. They conduct evening tours where participants walk through darkened rooms with flashlights, hoping to encounter spirits of dead children or the ghost of Captain Pabst himself. Visitors report cold spots in the nursery, mysterious footsteps on the grand staircase, and feelings of sadness in Maria's bedroom. Paranormal investigators bring electronic equipment to measure electromagnetic fields, temperature changes, and unexplained phenomena. The mansion's tragic history, 5 dead children, grieving parents, family collapse, provides perfect ghost story material. It's entertaining fiction. The real haunting of the Pabst Mansion isn't supernatural. It's economic. The mansion is haunted by fixed costs that exceed revenue. It's haunted by deferred maintenance backlogs. It's haunted by the constant struggle to attract enough visitors to fund operations. It's haunted by an endowment that's too small to sustain the building long term. The nonprofit that operates the mansion depends on admissions, event rentals, and donations. Annual operating costs exceed $500,000. Annual revenue barely covers that. There's no substantial reserve fund. One major disaster, a roof failure, a furnace collapse, a flood, could bankrupt the operation. The curse is structural fragility, not restless spirits. And this applies to every aspect of the Pabst story. The curse that killed 5 children wasn't supernatural. It was the medical reality of the 1870s, when even wealthy families lost children to preventable diseases. The curse that destroyed the fortune wasn't bad luck. It was prohibition combined with poor investment strategy and lack of family financial education. The curse that nearly demolished the mansion wasn't malevolent forces. It was urban decay and economic calculation that a parking lot generates better returns than maintaining a Victorian palace. Let me show you exactly how the curse works financially. A parking lot in that Milwaukee location generates roughly $100,000 per year with minimal operating costs, property taxes, snow removal, basic pavement maintenance. Net profit, approximately $85,000 annually. The Pabst mansion generates roughly $500,000 in revenue, but has operating costs of $500,000, resulting in zero net profit. The parking lot wins. The parking lot always wins. This is why developers wanted to demolish the mansion, not because they hated history, but because parking lots make mathematical sense and mansions don't. Now, apply this to family wealth. Maintaining a 20,000 square foot mansion costs far more than the pleasure it provides. That capital could be invested in stocks, bonds, real estate investment trusts, or businesses that generate compounding returns. Instead, it's locked into a depreciating asset with constant maintenance requirements. The Pabst children understood this intuitively, which is why they sold. They weren't honoring their father's legacy by keeping the mansion. They were bleeding capital maintaining a monument to his ego. Selling it was the financially intelligent choice, but it felt like betrayal. And this is the emotional trap that destroys family wealth. Keeping the mansion becomes about honoring Dad, rather than making smart financial decisions. Maintaining the family business becomes about preserving legacy rather than acknowledging when it's time to sell or pivot. Staying in the same city becomes about family roots rather than moving where economic opportunities exist. Emotion overrides economics, loyalty replaces logic, and fortunes evaporate while everyone feels noble about their poor decisions. The Rockefellers avoided this trap by treating business as business and family as family. They built mansions, but didn't let mansions define their identity. They passed down trusts managed by professionals who made decisions based on returns, not sentiment. They educated every generation in finance, not just brewery operations or real estate deals. They created systems that lasted beyond individuals. The Pabsts created a brewery and a mansion. Systems beat buildings, always. You think the Pabst story is ancient history? It's happening right now. Professional athletes sign $100 million contracts and go bankrupt within 5 years of retirement. Lottery winners receive $50 million payouts and end up broke, divorced, and alienated from their families within a decade. Tech entrepreneurs sell companies for hundreds of millions and blow it all on mansions, cars, and investments in friends' failing startups. The pattern is identical. Sudden wealth, lack of financial education, high fixed costs, poor investment strategy, family dysfunction, and total collapse. Let me give you specific examples. Antoine Walker, NBA player, earned $108 million during his career. Bankrupt in 2010. Mike Tyson, boxer, earned over $300 million. Bankrupt in 2003. Evander Holyfield, boxer, earned over $230 million. Foreclosed on his 54,000 square foot mansion in 2008. Scottie Pippen, NBA player, earned over $120 million. Lost most of it to bad investments and maintenance costs on multiple mansions. The pattern: high income, high spending, spectacular homes, financial collapse, exactly like the Pabsts. Or look at lottery winners. Jack Whitaker won $315 million in 2002. Within 4 years, he was broke, His granddaughter died of a drug overdose, his wife left him, and he faced multiple lawsuits. Billy Bob Harrell Jr. won $31 million in 1997. Within 2 years, he was bankrupt and divorced. He committed suicide in 1999. William Bud Post won $16.2 million in 1988. Within a year, he was $1 million in debt. He died in 2006 with assets of less than $10,000. Lottery winners have higher bankruptcy rates than the general population. Sudden wealth without financial education is a curse, not a blessing. The similarity to Frederick Pabst is eerie. Pabst went from ship captain, earning $52,000 per year in today's money, to brewery baron worth $500 million within 20 years. That's a 10,000 times wealth increase. Lottery winners go from ordinary income to multi-millions overnight. The time compression is different, but the psychological impact is identical. You haven't developed the habits, knowledge, or relationships necessary to manage that level of wealth. You make consumption decisions, mansions, cars, helping family members who have their own financial dysfunction, instead of investment decisions. And the Pabst pattern of childhood loss? Every wealthy family faces its own version. Sometimes it's death from disease, sometimes it's addiction, sometimes it's mental illness, sometimes it's simply children who reject their parents' values and wealth entirely. The Vanderbilts lost several children to early death and dealt with multiple descendants who struggled with addiction. The Kennedys faced tragedies that killed or destroyed multiple family members across generations. Wealth doesn't protect families from trauma. Often, it amplifies it by adding pressure, expectations, and public scrutiny. Here's the real connection to today. We're living through another Gilded Age right now. Wealth concentration is at levels not seen since the 1920s. Tech billionaires build mansions and space programs. Cryptocurrency millionaires buy Lamborghinis and beachfront properties. Social media influencers earn millions and spend it on designer clothes and lavish vacations. And most of them will lose it all within a generation because they are repeating the exact mistakes the Pabsts made, confusing income with wealth, spending on display instead of investing for cash flow, failing to educate their children in finance, and assuming that success is permanent. But success is never permanent. Wealth is always one generation from disappearing, and mansions don't protect you from either economic forces or family tragedy. The Pabst mansion proves it. Every room, every carved oak panel, every piece of stained glass is evidence that display destroys wealth and that even the grandest monuments can't protect against mortality, market forces, or mathematical inevitability. Let's summarize the financial destruction with pure numbers, because numbers don't lie and they don't soften the truth. Frederick Pabst's fortunate death in 1904, $18 million, or approximately $600 million in today's dollars. Pabst family control of the brewery lasted from 1873 to 1954, 81 years. Then they sold majority control. By 1985, the family had sold their remaining stake completely. Total time from Frederick taking over to complete family exit, 112 years. Compare that to the Rockefeller family, which has maintained wealth across 6 generations, spanning 150 years and counting. Or the Rothschild banking family, which has maintained wealth for over 250 years across multiple continents. The mansion itself tells a devastating story. Construction cost in 1892, $254,000, equivalent to $8.7 million today. Sale price in 1908, just 16 years later, $100,000, equivalent to $3.2 million today. That's a 63% loss in nominal dollars and a 63% loss in real terms. Sale price in 1978 to preservationists, $50,000, equivalent to roughly $250,000 today. That's a 97% loss from original construction cost. If Frederick had invested that $254,000 in a diversified stock portfolio in 1892 instead of building the mansion, that investment would be worth over $500 million. Today, assuming average market returns of 7% annually after inflation, the brewery tells a similar story of decline. Peak production under Frederick in 1893, 1 million barrels annually. Peak revenue in the pre-Prohibition era, over $25 million annually, equivalent to roughly $800 million today. Production in 1920, first full year of Prohibition, fewer than 100,000 barrels of near-beer products. Revenue drop, approximately 85%. The brewery never recovered its dominant position. By 1950, Pabst ranked 5th in the nation. By 1980, it had fallen to 10th. Today, Pabst Blue Ribbon exists as a brand owned by a private equity holding company with no connection to the Pabst family whatsoever. The children's survival rate, 50%. 5 survived out of 10 births. In modern terms, that would be considered a catastrophic failure of healthcare. But in the 1870s and 1880s, even among wealthy families, child mortality rates ranged from 30 to 50%. Scarlet fever, diphtheria, pneumonia, and other diseases killed indiscriminately. Frederick Pabst had the best doctors Milwaukee offered. He had a modern, well-heated home. He could afford any treatment available. And still, he lost half his children. Wealth extended his life. He lived to 68 when average life expectancy was 53. But it couldn't protect his children. The neighborhood decline around the mansion is equally stark. In 1892, the area around Grand Avenue and 20th Street was Milwaukee's most prestigious residential district. Property values were at the city's peak. By 1950, the neighborhood had declined significantly as wealthy families moved to suburbs. By 1975, when the mansion nearly became a parking lot, the area was considered near slum conditions with high vacancy rates, abandoned buildings, and minimal commercial activity. Property values had collapsed 70 to 80% in real terms. The mansion survived. The neighborhood didn't. Employment numbers tell another story. At peak operation in 1900, the Pabst Brewing Company employed over 1,500 workers in Milwaukee. That's 1,500 families, depending on Frederick Pabst's business decisions. When Prohibition hit, employment dropped below 200. Families suffered, workers lost homes. The economic damage rippled through Milwaukee's German immigrant community. This is the hidden cost of business failure that nobody calculates, not just the wealthy family that loses its fortune, but the thousands of working families whose livelihoods depend on that wealth being managed competently. And finally, the preservation cost. Wisconsin Heritage's A&E has spent over $5 million since 1978 restoring and maintaining the Pabst Mansion. That's $5 million from donations, grants, and operating revenue, none of it from the Pabst family. Annual operating costs today exceed $500,000. The mansion generates roughly $500,000 in revenue from tours, events, and gift shop sales, meaning it operates at break-even or slight loss most years. The building requires another estimated $3 million in deferred maintenance, roof replacement, masonry repairs, mechanical system updates that the nonprofit is struggling to fund. This is what legacy actually costs. Millions in perpetual maintenance funded by strangers, not family. Display destroys wealth, savings build it. That's the message of the Pabst Mansion, but it's the message nobody wants to hear because it contradicts everything we're taught about success in America. We're taught that success means visible achievement, the big house, the luxury car, the expensive lifestyle. We're taught that building monuments to ourselves is how we achieve immortality. We're taught that family legacy is about maintaining what the patriarch built rather than adapting to new economic realities. The Pabst Mansion proves all of that is wrong. Frederick Pabst built a $600 million fortune and lost it all within 30 years of his death. He built a technological marvel of a mansion, and his own children sold it at a devastating loss 16 years after completion. He built a brewing empire, and his family lost control within 2 generations. He had 10 children, and only 5 survived, and those survivors scattered rather than united around his legacy. Everything he built was temporary. Everything he valued disappeared. What would have worked? Let me tell you exactly. Instead of spending $254,000 on a mansion, invest it in diversified assets, stocks, bonds, farmland, mineral rights. That grows wealth rather than consuming it. Instead of maintaining a 20,000 square foot showpiece, live in a comfortable but modest home and invest the difference. Instead of assuming your children will want to run the family brewery, create trusts managed by professional investment firms with clear distributions and governance structures. Instead of treating tragedy as a private burden, get your family professional psychological support so trauma doesn't fracture unity across generations. The Rockefellers did all of this. That's why their fortune lasted. The Vanderbilts didn't. That's why their fortune disappeared despite being larger than the Pabsts at peak. The difference wasn't luck. It wasn't business acumen. Both families had that. The difference was treating wealth as a mathematical problem to solve rather than an identity to perform. Frederick Pabst performed wealth. He built the mansion to prove he'd arrived, to show Milwaukee society that a German immigrant ship captain could sit at the table with America's industrial elite. But performance isn't permanence. The mansion proved he was rich. It didn't keep him rich, and when he died, the performance ended, and the mathematics took over. High costs, declining revenue, family dysfunction, poor investment strategy, catastrophic regulatory change, and wealth evaporated. This is happening today to athletes, lottery winners, entrepreneurs, and influencers at an accelerating rate. The speed of wealth creation has increased. You can build a $100 million company in 5 years now instead of 20. But the speed of wealth destruction has increased even faster. One bad year, one market crash, one regulatory change, one family conflict, and it's gone. The mansion becomes a liability. The business becomes unsalvageable. The family fractures, the fortune disappears. And nobody's talking about this because admitting it means admitting that wealth is fragile, that success is temporary, that everything we're striving for can vanish, and that the monuments we build to ourselves might end up as parking lots or museums funded by strangers. The Pabst Mansion sits in Milwaukee today, beautifully restored, open to tourists who walk through and admire the carved oak and stained glass and marvel at the hydraulic elevator. They imagine what it would be like to live there, to have that level of wealth, to build something so magnificent. They take photos, they buy souvenirs, they leave thinking about Gilded Age glamour and immigrant success stories. They should be thinking about 5 dead children, a $600 million fortune evaporated, a family scattered and disconnected from its own legacy, and a mansion saved by preservationists who had no connection to the family that built it. They should be thinking about how display destroys wealth, how trauma fractures families, how even the grandest achievements are temporary, and how mathematics is more powerful than monuments. But that's not the story anyone wants to hear. So they admire the woodwork, take their photos, and leave, believing that if they work hard enough, they too can build something that lasts forever. They can't. The Pabst Mansion proves it. And nobody's talking about this because the truth is that wealth, achievement, and legacy are all temporary, and all the carved oak in the world won't change that mathematical reality. Next time, the Whitney family, how America's wealthiest bloodline lost $5 billion through art collecting, divorce, and the hidden clause in Cornelius Vanderbilt's will that destroyed his great-great-grandchildren.